Caligula, the emperor who defied all conventions, didn't just rule Rome with cruelty and extravagance. He also commanded the most feared army in the world. How did he manage to maintain the loyalty of the legions while challenging their traditions and ignoring fundamental strategies? Today, we're diving into the tumultuous relationship between Caligula and his troops, revealing the tactics he employed and those he overlooked to secure his dominance over the Roman army. What drove these legions to follow such an unpredictable leader, and how did this contribute to his downfall? The answer might surprise you. In 37 AD, Rome found itself under new leadership. The young and charismatic Caligula, who took the throne after the death of Tiberius. Expectations were high that his reign would bring relief to the empire after a period marked by paranoia and repression. However, what followed was a controversial and often chaotic government. Caligula's rise, surrounded by political intrigue, created a scenario where control over the legions was crucial for maintaining power. The Roman army, which had become the pillar of political stability, was now commanded by an unpredictable leader. The legions, accustomed to discipline and structure, quickly realized that Caligula would not follow the same pattern as his predecessors. Though young, the new emperor was fully aware that military power was key to the continuity of his reign. Shortly after taking control, he took measures to ensure the loyalty of his troops, a fundamental political move in an empire where military strength often decided the fate of leaders. At the same time, his eccentric and authoritarian nature was already beginning to emerge, planting the seeds of what would become a turbulent relationship with the army. The context in which Caligula rose to power was marked by the need for control over a vast and multifaceted empire. The borders of the Roman Empire needed to be maintained and expanded, and the legions were at the forefront of this mission. Caligula, aware of this, knew that to govern effectively, he had to win and maintain the trust of the soldiers. Initially, he was seen as a promising figure, someone who could revitalize the army after the years of Tiberius, where distrust prevailed. But his early decisions demonstrated that he was not just a promise, he represented a risk. Unlike Tiberius, who ruled from a distance with an iron fist, Caligula chose a more personal approach with the army. He organized festivals, parades, and games in honor of his legions, a clear attempt to win the soldiers' affection. For many, it was a welcome change. However, the extravagances began to emerge, and the young emperor started to be viewed with some suspicion by the more experienced commanders. While seeking popular and military support, he was quietly undermining the foundations on which the army was built. Caligula's rise marked a moment of delicate transition in the empire. The promises of change were tinged with uncertainty. His initial relationship with the army was shaped by a delicate balance between winning loyalty and challenging traditional norms. This fragile balance began to crumble as Caligula's behavior became increasingly erratic, creating rising tension between the emperor and his armed forces. From the beginning of his reign, Caligula understood that the Roman legions needed incentives to ensure their loyalty. In a shrewd move, he began distributing generous gifts and raising soldiers' salaries, a Roman tradition used by various emperors to win loyalty. By offering bonuses and rewards, he aimed to solidify his control over the legions, particularly in border regions where military presence was most crucial. These gifts, however, were not merely displays of generosity. They were also a form of manipulation. The promises made by Caligula went beyond gold and silver. He promised glorious military campaigns where soldiers could loot enemy territories, further enriching themselves. To the legions, these promises sounded like music. Many of them had served for years in arid and challenging regions, far from the power center of Rome. And these opportunities represented not just personal enrichment, but also elevation and status within the army. Caligula, therefore, played on the ambitions of his men, offering them more than just a military life. He offered them a chance for personal advancement. However, Caligula's promises often proved empty. Instead of leading grand military campaigns, he began using the resources and might of the legions for more personal purposes, including building extravagant monuments and hosting lavish parties. This generated frustration among the soldiers, who expected action and tangible rewards, but found an emperor increasingly disconnected from military realities. The loyalty, initially bought with gifts, began to wear thin as Caligula's true character was revealed. Despite the disappointments, Caligula continued to maintain control with occasional gestures of generosity. He knew that losing the loyalty of the legions would mean his downfall, so from time to time, he would appear at the front lines, not to fight, but to promise future glories. Yet these promises were not enough to keep morale high indefinitely. Many veteran soldiers, who had witnessed previous emperors in action, began to question Caligula's leadership, realizing that their emperor was more concerned with securing his political survival than expanding Rome's borders. Caligula's promises, though initially effective, proved insufficient in light of his constant behavioral changes and erratic priorities. The gifts that had once secured the soldiers' loyalty now seemed like a desperate attempt to maintain a facade of control. The army, in turn, felt increasingly distanced from their leader, and this disconnect began to pave the way for discontent that would eventually contribute to the emperor's downfall. Caligula's leadership on the military front was as unpredictable as his behavior in Rome. Although he commanded one of the most powerful armies in history, he often made decisions that confused and irritated his commanders. A notorious example was his supposed campaign against Britain. Instead of launching a legitimate invasion, Caligula had his soldiers march to the shores of the English Channel and, in a bizarre act, ordered them to collect seashells as spoils of war. This type of behavior led many to question his sanity and ability to lead a real military campaign. The veteran commanders of the legions, accustomed to well-organized campaigns with clear objectives, now found themselves at the mercy of a leader who seemed to follow no military logic. The campaigns planned by Caligula rarely had the strategic clarity that had defined the success of the Roman army in previous generations. He preferred spectacle over real conquest, often employing the legions to showcase his personal power and prestige rather than securing significant victories for Rome. This undermined troop morale and eroded the confidence of the more experienced officers. This lack of direction created chaos not only on the battlefield, but also within the army's command structure. Generals, who once had the autonomy to make tactical decisions in the field, were now bound to the whims of a leader who could change his mind at any moment. This environment of uncertainty undermined the army's efficiency, which no longer operated with the precision and discipline of the past. Caligula's campaigns became synonymous with extravagance and waste of resources, harming the empire's borders and fostering frustration among the legions. Caligula also harbored a deep distrust of his generals. Fearing betrayal, he avoided giving any of them enough power to challenge his authority. This resulted in a fragmented military system, where officers were often removed from their posts or replaced without clear justification. Caligula's paranoia prevented the formation of a strong central command, leaving the army disoriented in critical moments. The absence of cohesive leadership made the legions vulnerable, as their focus shifted more toward pleasing the emperor than defending the empire. Caligula's chaotic leadership style, marked by impulsive decisions and a constant distrust of his subordinates, eroded the military discipline that had been the hallmark of the Roman army. The relationship between the emperor and his troops rapidly deteriorated, with discontent growing within the ranks. The army, which once represented the strength and stability of Rome, now found itself on the brink of collapse, unable to operate under such erratic and unpredictable command. The Roman army was founded on values that dated back to the Republic: discipline, honor, and loyalty to the homeland. Caligula, however, seemed to disdain these traditions, preferring to mold the legions according to his own whims. One of his most controversial actions was naming his horse, Incitatus, as a priest and supposedly planning to make him consul. For the soldiers, this attitude was not just an insult to Roman institutions, but also a threat to the seriousness with which the army should be conducted. This generated outrage and, in some cases, silent revolt among the ranks. Moreover, Caligula broke with protocol by treating war and military glory as mere tools for his entertainment. He demanded that the legions participate in extravagant parades and celebrations, where the focus was not on the honor of the soldiers, but on the personal exaltation of the emperor. These actions were seen as an affront to Roman military pride, a culture rooted in austere traditions. For many officers and soldiers, Caligula's behavior represented a betrayal of the values for which so many had fought and died, increasing resentment towards him. Another significant break was how Caligula treated veteran commanders. He viewed the experience and popularity of certain generals as a direct threat to his power. Men who had served with distinction under previous emperors were publicly humiliated or removed from their command positions. The result was a demoralized army, where meritocracy, an essential value in the legions, was replaced by the whims of an unstable leader. This disdain for tradition caused many soldiers to lose faith in his leadership and begin questioning how far they were willing to follow Caligula. Caligula also challenged the concept of discipline that had been carefully built within the legions over centuries. Under his command, the rigidity of the chain of command was relaxed, and he often intervened directly in army affairs, frequently without understanding the tactical complexities involved. Caligula's orders, often chaotic and contradictory, created an environment where soldiers and officers didn't know whom to trust or how to proceed in battle situations. The breakdown of these traditions led to a growing insubordination, with officers secretly questioning the emperor's ability to command. By challenging the values that upheld the Roman army, Caligula created an irreparable rift between himself and his troops. The army, which had once been his greatest source of power, now found itself divided between loyalty to the emperor and the preservation of its long-standing traditions. This rising tension between the need to follow orders and the desire to honor the ancient military values of Rome laid the groundwork for an inevitable collapse of the relationship between Caligula and his legions.